Welcome to the Frontline Leadership Podcast, where we explore actionable insights and real-world strategies to help leaders at every level elevate their impact. Let's dive in and take your leadership journey to the next level. This podcast is pre-recorded and generated for auditory learners, similar to text-to-speech software. The content is intended to provide valuable insights and is not live or interactive. The views and opinions expressed are those of the author and do not necessarily reflect the official position of any organization or entity.
Picture this. You are sitting in a sprawling corporate town hall meeting.
Oh, yeah. We have all been there.
Right. The lights are slightly dimmed. There's this massive PowerPoint slide glowing on the screen behind the executive team.
Probably with some very vague corporate buzzwords on it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the CEO leans into the microphone and says something you have probably heard, a dozen times in your career.
Oh, I can guess what it is.
They say, this isn't about lowering our standards. It's about preparing our people for the complexity of today's environment.
Yeah, that classic line. I mean, it sounds incredibly measured, right? Very forward-looking and responsible on the surface.
It really does. You hear that, and you might think, well, they genuinely care about getting everyone ready for this wild, unpredictable future.
Sure.
But what if that phrase is actually a massive red flag? What if it is almost never about the employees being unready, but rather this profound structural failure happening several floors above them?
I love that framing because it flips the script entirely on how we diagnose organizational health. When a company publicly announces it needs to, prepare its people, it is usually a diagnostic signal.
A signal of what, exactly?
Well, leadership is often frantically trying to absorb the institutional shockwaves of their own systemic failures. And framing it as a workforce readiness issue, it basically deflects the accountability downward.
Deflecting the blame to the very people dealing with the fallout.
Exactly.
Well, welcome to the deep dive. Today, our mission is to completely decode that corporate cliche.
It's a big one to tackle.
It really is. We're pulling from an incisive piece of writing today. It is called The Stewardship Gap by Dr. Christian Skierski.
He's the founder of Frontline Leadership Consulting, right?
Yes, exactly. And he argues, using just a mountain of organizational data, that workforce readiness failures begin almost exclusively at the leadership and management layer.
The data he brings in is honestly pretty hard to argue with.
Yeah, and by the end of this conversation, this framework is going to change how you view your boss, your team, and really why your organization performs the way it does.
It really reframes the whole picture.
Okay, let's unpack this. I want to start with the very premise of that CEO's statement.
Right, the idea of complexity.
Yeah, there is this foundational assumption that the modern workforce is somehow, uniquely overwhelmed by a brand new era of complexity.
We can call that the complexity myth. I mean, it is embedded in almost every corporate training retreat today.
Oh, absolutely.
There is this narrative that complexity is a brand new condition, that today's employees are facing a chaotic environment that prior generations of workers simply, didn't have to navigate.
But looking at the historical economic record, that claim falls apart pretty quickly, doesn't it?
It really does. The timeline of modern business is essentially just one continuous crisis of complexity.
Let's trace that timeline, actually. I think seeing the history back-to-back puts this whole new era argument into perspective.
Good idea. Well, think back to the 1970s.
I do.
Organizations were dealing with simultaneous stagflation, an oil embargo, and the total collapse of the Bretton Woods financial system.
Wow, yeah.
They were managing input cost volatility that would honestly paralyze modern supply chain leaders today.
And then the calendar turns to the 1980s.
Right, which brought the era of hostile takeovers, aggressive deregulation, and the rise of Japanese manufacturing precision.
Which basically dismantled and rebuilt entire American industrial sectors overnight.
Exactly. The pressure was immense.
And the 1990s didn't offer a break either. You had the dawn of total digital disruption.
Rapid globalization.
Yeah, and NAFTA-driven restructuring that permanently altered labor economics.
Then we march right into the early 2000s. The dot-com crash wiped out trillions in paper wealth.
Just completely vanished.
Yep. We had the economic contraction following 9/11, the crushing new compliance burdens of Sarbanes-Oxley, and of course a complete collapse of institutional trust following the Enron scandal.
And we haven't even touched on the 2008 financial crisis yet.
Right.
Which wiped out, 8.7 million jobs in the United States alone?
Exactly. Just massive disruption.
Followed eventually by the massive remote work pivot of 2020 and the rise of the gig economy. All of this compressed into a single professional generation.
So the historical through line is undeniable here. Complexity is not a new condition that just magically arrived to test the current workforce.
It's just the baseline.
It is the permanent operating environment of every competitive organization in every single era.
But consultants love to throw around that acronym, right? VUCA.
Oh, VUCA. Volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity.
Yeah, that one.
They package it as this new framework to describe a new reality, but it is just a new label applied to the exact same conditions that prior generations navigated continuously.
And those prior generations were never labeled as underprepared in the same way.
Exactly.
Wait, let me push back on that a little bit, just on behalf of anyone listening who works in tech or data right now.
Sure, go ahead.
Because the speed of technology today genuinely feels different. I mean, AI and platform disruptions are moving at velocity we honestly just haven't seen before.
That's a fair point.
So isn't that a new flavor of complexity? Doesn't that require a different level of readiness?
Well, the tools are faster, definitely, and the transmission of information is instantaneous now.
Right.
But the fundamental requirement of a human workforce to adapt to shifting organizational pressures, that is a constant.
Okay, I see what you mean.
The human capacity to learn and pivot hasn't downgraded. The real question we need to ask is why this particular generation of employees is being identified as insufficiently prepared.
When prior generations were just assumed to be capable of handling their own massive economic pressures.
Exactly. They were assumed to be capable, whereas today we default to assuming the workforce is deficient.
You know, it sounds like corporate leaders are treating complexity like a brand new weather pattern we just discovered.
I like that analogy.
Yeah, when in reality it's been raining since the 1970s. I mean, we don't need to teach people what rain is. We need to ask why management isn't handing out umbrellas.
That is spot on. And what's fascinating here is that the umbrella is precisely what the management tier is engineered to provide.
Right.
When senior leadership declares they are preparing their people, they effectively divert attention away from the layer most responsible for that readiness.
The managers.
Exactly. It might not always be an intentional misdirection, but it is consistently consequential.
Because they look for solutions in the wrong place?
Yes, they try to fix the frontline worker instead of fixing the structural support system around them.
So if the workforce has always been capable of handling complexity, we really have to look at what is actually causing these massive organizational breakdowns.
We have to look at the data.
Right. And the numbers point away from the employees and squarely at middle management. I mean, the data in Dr. Skierski's analysis is pretty difficult to argue with here.
It is. Let's examine Gallup's 2015 State of the American Manager report.
Okay, lay it on us.
They drew on data from over 2.5 million manager-led work units. This is across 195 countries.
That is a massive sample size.
Huge. And Gallup found that managers account for at least 70% of the variance in employee engagement scores.
Wait, 70%?
Yes.
Meaning if a team is totally checked out or, a team is firing on all cylinders, 70% of the reason why comes down to the behavior of the person leading them.
That one person, yes. But the devastating part of that Gallup study is their finding on selection.
How so?
Organizations select managers with the right talent for the role only about 18% of the time.
Hold on. Only 18%.
Yep.
That leaves an 82% failure rate in management selection. That is just staggering.
It is wild. Roughly 4 out of every 5 management appointments are made without adequately assessing if that person has the actual capacity to develop other human beings.
4 out of 5?
Yeah. Multiply an 82% failure rate across a massive corporation over a decade.
Oh, man.
The downstream performance failures are no longer accidental at that point. They are baked into the architecture of the company.
There is an assumption out there, especially in tech, that if you just hire the absolute smartest people, they don't even need managers.
Oh, I've heard that one plenty of times.
Right. Like, they just need to be left alone to do the work. And the analysis brings up Google's Project Oxygen from back in 2008.
Yeah, that's a perfect example.
They essentially tried to engineer their way out of needing a management layer at all.
Right. Google's initial hypothesis was driven by their highly technical, engineering-heavy culture.
Makes sense for them.
They suspected manager quality was largely irrelevant, so they unleashed their data scientists to prove that managers were just a bureaucratic hurdle.
And what did the data scientists find?
The data definitively proved the exact opposite.
Of course it did.
Manager quality was one of the strongest predictors of team performance, retention, and employee well-being across the entire company.
But the fascinating part is what actually made those Google managers effective.
Right?
Because it wasn't that they were the smartest coders in the room who could just jump in and fix everyone's bugs.
Not at all. The top behaviors of Google's most effective managers weren't technical. They were developmental.
What does that mean in practice?
It was their ability to coach, foster psychological safety, communicate clear expectations, and really invest in the career growth of their direct reports.
Okay, so human skills.
Exactly. When those developmental behaviors were missing, team output plummeted. And that drop in output correlated directly with the manager's failure, not with a sudden capability deficit in the software engineers.
Here's where it gets really interesting. So we are essentially promoting the best solo violinist to conduct the entire orchestra.
That's exactly what's happening.
And then we blame the orchestra when the music sounds terrible, completely ignoring the fact that the conductor doesn't know how to keep time or, cue the brass section.
When we pick them for their ability to play an instrument, not their ability to lead musicians.
Right. To take the mechanics of that failure a step further, we could look at Amy Edmondson's research out of Harvard Business School.
Oh, her work on psychological safety is brilliant.
Yes, especially in her book, The Fearless Organization. It proves that teams with high psychological safety vastly outperform teams without it.
And just to define that, psychological safety is the shared belief that you can speak up, take a risk, or make a mistake without being punished.
Exactly. And those teams innovate more and adapt faster to complexity. Honestly, psychological safety sounds like a vague cultural buzzword, but her research shows it is a highly specific, measurable condition.
It really is. And the crucial point here is that it is not a permanent, innate personality trait of the workforce.
Right.
Psychological safety is a management creation. It exists, or it fails to exist, based entirely on the specific daily reactions of the immediate leader.
Give me an example of how that plays out.
Well, if an employee points out a flaw in a project, does the manager thank them for catching it? Or do they publicly berate them for slowing down the timeline?
Wow, yeah, that is a huge difference.
That single reaction dictates the safety of the entire team moving forward. If an organization looks at its workforce and says, our people are risk-averse and passive, they aren't describing their employees' limitations.
What are they describing then?
They are describing the management culture that has shaped those employees.
And the financial cost of misdiagnosing this is just staggering.
Yeah.
I mean, the DDI Global Leadership Forecast from 2021, they surveyed over 15,000 leaders.
Across 50 countries, too.
Right. They found that organizations with high-quality leadership development programs outperform their competitors financially by 4.2 times.
4.2 times the financial performance. That is massive.
But yet, only 11% of organizations reported having a strong leadership bench. If the financial upside is that massive, why is the bench so thin?
Because the management layer responsible for building that talent pipeline isn't being held accountable for it.
They just aren't evaluated on it.
Exactly. They aren't selected for pipeline health, and they aren't financially rewarded for it.
So if 82% of managers lack developmental skills, what does that actually look like on the floor?
Well, it gets dark pretty quickly.
Yeah, because it doesn't just look like low engagement or a thin bench.
Yeah.
It often looks like institutional sabotage. Just look at what happened at Wells Fargo.
Wells Fargo is perhaps the clearest illustration of what Dr. Skirsky calls accountability displacement.
Break that down for us.
So in 2016, the bank settled for $185 million. This was after it came to light that between 2011 and 2016, employees had opened roughly 3.5 million unauthorized customer accounts.
3.5 million fake accounts.
Mm.
And the company's initial reaction was basically to point the finger straight down to the bottom of the organizational chart.
They blamed the bad apples. They fired approximately 5,300 frontline employees and painted it as a massive workforce ethics failure.
Just completely threw the tellers under the bus.
Right. But the subsequent congressional testimonies and regulatory investigations revealed the mechanics of how that fraud was actually generated.
Because it didn't start at the bottom.
Exactly. The cross-selling pressure didn't originate with the tellers or the branch bankers. It originated in a management culture that mandated mathematically unachievable sales quotas.
They set up a system where if an employee didn't hit these literally impossible daily targets, they were fired.
Yes.
They structurally incentivized volume over integrity.
Management created an environment where failing to meet the targets carried immediate career death. The mechanisms for how you met those targets were intentionally ignored by regional managers.
Ignored or maybe encouraged with a wink and a nod.
Oh, they knew. The Senate Banking Committee actually found that senior leadership had received internal warnings about these fraudulent sales practices years before it went public.
Wait, years before?
Yes, but those warnings were managed institutionally as public relations risks, rather than treating them as a sign that the management incentive structures were fundamentally broken.
So the frontline employees who lost their jobs were really just the most visible symptoms of a disease that started in the executive suite.
There's an organizational learning framework by Ardress and Schoen that explains the mechanics of this perfectly.
Okay, let's hear it.
They differentiate between single-loop learning and double-loop learning.
Okay.
Wells Fargo was executing single-loop learning. They saw a symptom, the fake accounts, and they fired the visible actors to adjust the immediate behavior.
But they left the actual root cause alone.
Exactly. They left the governing variables untouched, the management incentive structure, the accountability culture, the ethical climate. None of that changed initially.
They just swapped out the people and kept the broken machine running.
Exactly right.
But fixing the machine itself would be double-loop learning, right? Which requires actually interrogating and changing those governing variables.
Yeah.
So when did Wells Fargo finally engage in double-loop learning?
Only when regulators and the press made it completely impossible to avoid.
Forced into it.
Yes. That is when the financial accountability finally flowed upward, where the structural power actually resided.
How high up did it go?
Well, former CEO John Stump had to forfeit $41 million in unvested equity.
Oh, wow.
And the former head of retail banking, Carrie Tolstedt, she forfeited $19 million.
That is a serious correction. But this dynamic isn't isolated to the banking sector or instances of outright fraud, right?
No, not at all.
The exact same downward blaming mechanism can destroy a dominant tech empire, too. I mean, the Nokia case study really upends how we usually think about technological disruption.
Nokia is a tragic example of how the management layer filters reality.
At their peak, they were huge.
They held 40% of the global mobile phone market share.
40%.
And then they completely missed the smartphone platform shift. Now, the popular narrative was just that it was a simple technological miscalculation.
That their engineers were just too slow or, underprepared for the complexity of the Apple and Android ecosystems.
Right. But a 2016 study by Vori and Hui, published in the Strategic Management Journal, looked into the internal organizational dynamics.
And what did they find? Because it wasn't the engineer's fault, was it?
The study found that the middle managers and developers actually knew about the vulnerabilities in Nokia's Symbian operating system way earlier than senior leadership ever acknowledged.
Wait, really? The engineers knew?
They knew. The workforce wasn't underprepared for the complexity of the smartphone market. They saw it coming clearly.
So what was the mechanism of failure then?
Fear. Vori and Hu found that senior leaders had immense institutional arrogance based on their past dominance.
Okay, that makes sense.
They demanded optimistic projections and pressured middle managers for good news. The middle managers, terrified for their jobs and their budgets, hid the severe technological delays.
Wow.
The organizational culture treated candor about their platform weaknesses as a literal career liability.
So in both cases, Wells Fargo and Nokia, the frontline workers actually possessed the localized knowledge to navigate the complexity.
They did.
But they were trapped in a management architecture that forced them to either commit fraud to survive or stay completely silent while the ship sank.
The readiness gap wasn't at the contributor level. It was in a management layer that lacked the psychological safety to receive bad news.
And lacked the structural accountability to pass that bad news up the chain to the executives who needed to hear it.
Exactly.
Now, when you look at companies trapped in that kind of toxic, downward blaming cycle, the assumption is usually that they have to fire everyone and just start over.
Right. Clean house.
But there is a massive case study that proves the exact opposite, focusing purely on changing the management layer.
Let's talk about the Microsoft correction.
Yeah. When Satya Nadella took over as CEO in 2014, my assumption was always that they just hired better coders or invested billions more in R&D to catch up in the cloud wars.
That's what most people think.
But that's not what the data shows, is it?
Not at all. Microsoft is the ultimate proof that the stewardship gap is a correctable condition, provided you intervene at the structural level.
What was going on there before 2014?
Before Nadella, Microsoft was highly profitable, but culturally calcified. They were operating under a brutal stack ranking performance system.
For those who don't know, stack ranking is a structural nightmare.
It really is.
Basically, if I have a team of 10 people, I am forced to grade them on a bell curve. Even if all 10 are superstars, I am required by HR to label 1 or 2 of them as low performers and potentially fire them.
It forces managers to act as judges rather than coaches.
Right.
Under stack ranking, an employee's incentive is to make sure their teammates fail, because helping a peer succeed might push them higher on the curve and push you down.
That is so toxic.
It created a culture of intense internal competition, backstabbing, and total risk aversion. Employees weren't underprepared. They were optimizing their survival in a management architecture that structurally rewarded individual positioning over collective innovation.
And Nadella didn't roll out some massive workforce readiness training program for the coders to teach them how to be more collaborative, did he?
No, he overhauled the management systems. He rooted the new system in Carol Dweck's growth mindset framework.
A huge shift.
Huge. He eliminated the stack ranking system entirely. He restructured the management accountability model so that it rewarded team development and collaborative output rather than individual dominance.
Okay, so the managers were evaluated differently.
Yes. Managers were suddenly expected and evaluated on their ability to invest developmentally in their direct reports.
Wow.
The shift went from proving you were the smartest person in the room to proving you could elevate the intelligence of the room.
Just so we're absolutely clear here, Microsoft didn't fire their supposedly underprepared workforce to get to a $2 trillion valuation.
Yep.
They kept the exact same workforce and completely changed the rules of the game for the managers.
The workforce didn't materially change in those early transformation years. The management system that shaped their daily behavior did.
And look at the results.
Market capitalization skyrocketed from $300 billion to over $2 trillion. Innovation velocity accelerated. That is the stewardship model operating exactly as designed.
Okay, if the data is this clear and the financial upside is that massive, why do organizations keep getting it wrong? Like, why do we keep building this stewardship gap?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we can turn to the leadership pipeline framework.
Okay, developed by Charon, Drotter, and Noel, right?
Yes. It pinpoints a structural promotion error that happens across almost every industry.
What's the error?
Organizations overwhelmingly promote individual contributors into management roles based on their performance as an individual contributor, or simply because they culturally fit in.
Returning to our earlier analogy,
Yeah.
it's literally promoting the best solo violinist to conduct the orchestra.
Yes.
The logic feels intuitive on the surface.
Yes.
Like, the highest performer should obviously lead the team, right?
It feels intuitive, but the leadership pipeline research proves that individual contribution and managerial development are completely different competency sets.
Totally different jobs.
Completely. Moving into management requires a fundamental values shift. A person has to shift from valuing their personal technical achievement to valuing achievement through others.
Okay, but if that shift in values doesn't happen, what does that manager look like on a daily basis?
The new manager just operates like a highly paid individual contributor who happens to have direct reports.
Ah, yeah.
They hoard the most important technical work. They focus on their own output to impress their boss. They don't build succession depth, and they don't coach.
Because they were never asked to.
Exactly. Because the organization selected them entirely for their individual skills, the organization never holds them accountable for those developmental outcomes.
And then what happens?
Multiply that structural error across an entire middle management tier for a decade. Executive leadership eventually looks down at a stagnant company and misdiagnoses it as a workforce readiness problem.
Man, we have covered a massive amount of ground today.
We really have.
From historical economic crises to the internal incentive structures of Wells Fargo, Nokia, and Microsoft. So what does this all mean? If you are listening to this right now, how do you actually apply this framework to your daily professional life?
Well, Dr. Skusky suggests holding up an organizational mirror and asking different diagnostic questions.
Okay, like what?
If you are an executive or a manager, do not survey the workforce to see if they are ready for complexity. Ask yourself, what is our actual manager-to-employee developmental conversation ratio?
That's a great metric.
Right. How are we measuring that? When a performance gap surfaces on a team, what is our default attribution? Do we immediately blame the employee, or do we examine the manager's coaching and the system's incentives?
I love that. And what if you are an individual contributor? What if you are the one sitting in that town hall being told, you need to prepare for complexity.
This raises an important question, and it flips the power dynamic for the individual listener entirely.
How so?
The data overwhelmingly shows that your capacity to thrive in a complex environment is dictated largely by your manager's ability to coach you and create psychological safety.
Right.
Therefore, you should be interviewing them as hard as they interview you.
Oh, I like that.
When you sit down for your next job interview, instead of just trying to prove you can handle the technical complexity of the role, demand to see your future boss's track record of getting their direct reports promoted.
Just straight up ask them.
Yes. Ask them, who have you developed and where are they now?
Wow.
If they cannot point to a history of developing people, you aren't stepping into a complex environment. You are stepping into a stewardship gap.
You are not stepping into complexity. You are stepping into a stewardship gap. That is a completely different way to evaluate a career move.
It reframes the entire employer-employee contract.
It really does. It also makes you wonder about where this is all heading.
With technology, you mean?
Yeah, especially with AI. As AI starts taking over the technical execution of our work, the coding, the data analysis, the sheer volume of output, the individual contributor work.
Exactly. The value of a manager will no longer be tied to their technical individual contributor skills at all.
That's a fascinating point.
Right. We might finally be forced to abandon the individual contributor mindset in management simply because the machines will be doing the contributing.
So what's left for the human managers?
The only job left for human managers will be the full-time development of human potential.
That is some serious food for thought.
It really is. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Take this framework, walk into your office tomorrow, and look at your workplace through this new lens.
It will change how you see everything.
Definitely. The next time you're sitting in that town hall and the executive on stage says they need to prepare you for the complexity of today's environment, well, you'll know exactly what they are actually saying. Keep asking the hard questions.
If this conversation made you rethink how leadership is evaluated, you'll want to stay with Frontline Leadership. Follow, subscribe, and join us as we break down what decision makers are really listening for when the stakes are high.